My mom gave her the family ring, so I used it to sign my exit. The day Mom slipped the family ring onto Olivia's finger, the room felt colder than ever before. That small, glittering circle wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a message, a symbol that said loudly who was favored and who was forgotten. I stood there, silent and shrinking, watching as the legacy passed to someone else. The smile on Mom's face was radiant. But for me, it was a shutter slamming shut on. Years of longing for acceptance. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the storm of emotions raging inside me. That ring wasn't mine to wear, it never had been. It was a stark reminder of a family divide I could no longer ignore. They handed her the legacy and left me with silence. Tears welled up, but I swallowed them, refusing to give my pain a voice. The room was filled with celebration, but I felt the crushing weight of exclusion. The ring sparkled under the chandelier's light, a glittering chain binding my dreams to a past that rejected me. Dreams of love, belonging, and a place in the family I never truly had. I thought back to every birthday overlooked, every success ignored, every tear shed in private. This moment crystallized all that pain into a harsh, unyielding truth. My mother's love was wrapped in favoritism, and I wasn't the recipient. I glanced at Olivia's joyful face, knowing she had no idea what that ring truly represented. A wound more than a gift. In that instant, I vowed silently to stop fighting for their approval. I would forge my own path without their blessing or acknowledgement. I pressed my palm against the glass of my old diary, where I'd recorded hopes for family unity and love. That chapter was closing. The ring on Olivia's finger wasn't just jewelry. It was the start of my exit, quiet, unannounced, but resolute. She got the ring, I got my freedom. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I simply stepped back, breathed deep, and walked away. Growing up, I was always the daughter who felt like she was standing in the shadows. Mom's favoritism was no secret. Olivia was the golden child, the one who received praise and attention, while I was the one who learned to keep quiet and stay out of the way. Birthdays and holidays were never fair. Olivia had grand celebrations, filled with friends and relatives, while mine were often overlooked or forgotten. It felt like an unspoken rule that I didn't deserve the same joy or recognition. Mom would gush over Olivia's achievements, her grades, her social life, while my successes were met with vague compliments or a quick change of subject. It was clear who the star of the family was, and it wasn't me. Dad usually stayed quiet, his passive approval reinforcing Mom's favoritism. He never stood up for me or tried to bridge the growing gap between his daughters. His silence spoke volumes. I remember the countless times I tried to connect with Mom, only to be met with indifference or subtle dismissal. It wasn't that she didn't love me. It was that she loved Olivia more, and she made sure I knew it. Every family gathering felt like a reminder of my place, always second best, always the outsider. I watched as Olivia was lifted up and celebrated, while I faded into the background. The family ring had always been a symbol of legacy, a piece passed down to the favored daughter. When Mom handed it to Olivia, it wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration of who belonged and who didn't. I remember holding the old travel diary from my childhood, filled with dreams of family unity and love. That diary became a symbol of what I lost, a bond I thought I had but never truly did. The years of favoritism left me isolated and invisible, struggling to find my own worth beyond their approval. I learned to survive in the gaps they left behind. The ring on Olivia's finger was a constant reminder that the family's love was conditional and unevenly distributed. It symbolized a divide too deep to bridge with words. I realized that if I wanted to be truly seen and valued, I'd have to step away from a family that didn't choose me. It was painful but necessary. The pain of exclusion was heavy, but the hope of freedom was heavier. I began to envision a life where I was the center of my own story, not a supporting character in theirs. That hope was fragile, but it was enough to keep me going. It was the spark that would eventually lead me to walk away. I wasn't just the daughter who was passed over. I was the woman who chose herself, who refused to be defined by favoritism. In a family that chose her, I chose me. The red flags were subtle at first, easy to dismiss if you didn't live with them every day. At family dinners, Mom would hang on Olivia's every word, laughing at her jokes and praising her achievements. When I spoke, I was met with polite smiles or silence. Gifts told their own story. Olivia's birthdays were lavish affairs, filled with friends and extravagant presents. Mine were marked by a quick card or an afterthought gift. When I asked Mom about it, she said, "Olivia needs more encouragement." Vacations and trips were a glaring reminder of my place. Dad would plan cruises and weekend getaways for Jake and Matt, inviting them excitedly while forgetting to include me. The family chat buzzed with their plans I only heard about. After the fact, photos from those trips were shared with glee. Olivia front and center, Dad smiling proudly beside her, me, often cropped out or standing in the background, a silent witness to the exclusion. When I questioned Mom about the favoritism, she dismissed it as boys being boys or girls are different. Dad stayed quiet, avoiding conflict. I was left to accept their version of love or lack of it. Even Jake and Matt participated in the divide, ignoring my attempts to connect and only reaching out when they needed something. Our relationships felt transactional, not familial. Conversations about family events happened without me. Invitations never came if I brought it up. I was called too sensitive or told I should be grateful for what I had. Holiday cards featured my brothers in smiling photos, while I was just a name at the bottom. Family stories were told without me, memories made without my presence. Every slight piled up like bricks, building a wall I couldn't climb. I learned to hide the pain and pretend everything was okay. Friends asked if my family was normal. I smiled and said yes, afraid to reveal the truth. The cruise was the final proof, an extravagant celebration I wasn't part of. A family that had chosen favorites. They weren't just ignoring me. They were erasing me. The betrayal wasn't subtle or hidden, it was glaringly obvious in the cruise photos shared with the family group. I sat there, phone in hand, scrolling through picture after picture of Dad and my brothers smiling under a golden sky. My heart sank deeper with every image I wasn't part of. I searched desperately for a sign of me, a shadow, a smile, a trace of my presence, but there was nothing. I was erased from memories that were meant to include me. Instead, I found Jake, wearing a silver ring, a chilling echo of the family ring Mom had given Olivia, a bond I was denied. They took my place in the sun and left me in the shadows. The group chat buzzed with laughter, plans for future trips, and endless congratulations. My silence was deafening, but no one asked why. I was the invisible daughter, expected to remain quiet. In my hands, I clutched an old travel diary filled with dreams of family trips and closeness that never came. It was a relic now, a symbol of hopes lost to favoritism and neglect. Humiliation settled in my bones. The family I thought I had was just an illusion, a staged play where I was a mere background character, forgotten and overlooked. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I closed the diary and made a silent vow. I would no longer seek their approval or validation. She got the ring. I signed my exit. That moment marked a turning point in my life, a quiet but resolute decision to walk away from the favoritism and forge my own path. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to their recognition, and my happiness didn't depend on their acceptance. Each day, I felt the weight of their exclusion lessen, replaced by the strength I was slowly reclaiming. I began to understand that walking away was not giving up, it was choosing myself. The betrayal hurt, but it also freed me from chains I didn't realize I was wearing. I took a deep breath, letting go of the past, and stepped into a future defined by my own terms. They handed her the legacy, but I chose freedom. That night, I placed the diary on the shelf and turned off the lights. A new chapter was beginning, one where I was the author of my own story. The days after the cruise photos were shared felt like sinking in a sea of silence. Each morning I woke up to the weight of exclusion pressing down on my chest, reminding me of the family I had lost. It was a loneliness that no words could describe. At work, my mind was a battlefield of grief and anger. Meetings blurred as I replayed the images of laughter and love I was never part of. Concentrating became impossible when pain filled every corner of my thoughts. Friends reached out, but I pushed them away. How could I explain that my own family treated me like a ghost? How do you say you were billed for a honeymoon you never attended? I wasn't just left out, I was erased. Nights were the hardest. I held my velvet box tightly, the one with the silver ring I never wore since the cruise. Tears came silently, mixing sorrow with a quiet rage I didn't understand. At first, I questioned myself constantly. Was I too sensitive? Was I making things worse? But the evidence was undeniable in missed calls, cold messages, and absence that screamed louder than words. Therapy became my lifeline. I learned their neglect was about their flaws, not mine. That knowledge was both painful and freeing. A paradox of healing. Journaling stopped, words fled me, and silence became both refuge and prison. I withdrew, afraid to face the judgment I anticipated at family gatherings. The thought of seeing their indifferent faces made me tremble. I avoided every event, sinking deeper into isolation. One night, I wrote a letter I never sent, a raw confession of pain, betrayal, and hope. Reading it aloud was cathartic. A step toward reclaiming my voice. Sometimes, hitting rock bottom is the first step to rising. I realized I couldn't wait for their acceptance anymore. I had to find my own way out of the darkness. The silence that suffocated me became the soil where my resilience took root. I began dreaming of a life beyond their favoritism, a life where I was truly seen and loved. Each breath was a step forward, each tear a release of the past, and in that collapse, I found the first spark of rebirth. The day I decided to write again was the day I began reclaiming myself. I sat at my desk, a blank notebook before me, and poured out the pain and the hope that had long been buried. Writing became my sanctuary, a place where my voice could finally be heard without judgment. I wrote about the exclusion, the favoritism, the ache of being invisible in my own family. It wasn't to blame but to understand, to heal. Each word was a brick rebuilding the foundation of my self-worth. For the first time, my voice belonged solely to me. Sharing my story with close friends was terrifying but healing. Their tears, their hugs, their understanding showed me I wasn't alone. Many had felt the sting of family neglect and favoritism. Therapy helped me unpack the layers of hurt. I realized their rejection was about their flaws, not mine. It was a lesson in self-love and acceptance that no one else could teach me. I set firm boundaries. No more silent suffering, no more unpaid emotional debts. Saying no became an act of courage and self-respect. The family ring, once a symbol of exclusion, became my talisman of strength. I wore it daily as a reminder of my resilience. They tried to erase me, but I wrote myself back into existence. I booked a solo trip, a gift to myself. Traveling alone, I discovered strength I never knew I had: courage, freedom, and peace. I reconnected with old friends and found new ones who saw and celebrated me. Their presence was a balm to my wounded soul. I shared my journey online, not for pity but for power. Messages poured in from others who found hope in my story. Mom called once, her voice tentative. I chose not to answer. Healing required protecting my peace, not reopening old wounds. I smiled more, laughed louder, allowed myself joy without apology. I stopped waiting for their love and started fiercely loving myself. The past lingered but no longer defined me. I was reclaiming my life, one word, one step, one breath at a time. I didn't send angry messages or public posts. I didn't confront or argue. Instead, I chose silence, the kind that echoes louder than any shout. I stopped answering calls, texts, and invitations. My absence unsettled them more than any fight could have. I was no longer their quiet victim but a storm brewing in stillness. When photos from family events appeared online, I didn't comment or react. I let their joy float in empty space. Untouched by me, that void was my loudest statement, a refusal to be invisible anymore. They expected obedience. I gave them absence. The family ring stayed on my finger, no longer a symbol of exclusion, but one of strength. Wearing it reminded me of the power I reclaimed by walking away silently, refusing to engage in their favoritism. I wrote and published essays, raw and honest, about betrayal, neglect, and finding self-worth. Names were changed, but the truth was clear. It wasn't revenge. It was a declaration of recognition. At my book launch, I read a passage about being erased yet choosing to exist boldly anyway. The room fell silent, filled only with soft tears and quiet applause. I stood firm, no longer seeking approval, only presence. Dad sent a brief text, "Proud of you." I didn't reply. Words without action meant nothing after years of silence. Mom called, her voice trembling with false regret. I didn't answer. Boundaries had to be firm, unyielding, even if it hurt. I wasn't their background music anymore. I became my own soundtrack. I mailed a copy of my book to their house, unmarked, with a single note inside: "You gave me silence. I gave you a voice." The last gift they'd receive from me that night. I locked the door behind me and felt lighter than ever before. The past was still there, but it no longer owned me. I was finally free. I found strength in absence and power in quiet. My revenge was not loud. It was liberation. In letting go, I claimed my worth. In silence, I spoke volumes. The family who once erased me now hears my story, even if they never respond. Months passed, and the silence between us grew, but this time, it was my peace, not pain. I started living for myself, embracing moments that brought me joy, morning coffee rituals, evening walks, deep conversations with friends who saw me fully. These small pleasures stitched together the fabric of a new life, one where I was no longer invisible. The silver ring I once hid away became a daily reminder of resilience. Polished and shining, it symbolized the journey from neglect to self-acceptance. Wearing it felt like reclaiming the story I was always meant to write. I booked my first solo trip, a gift to myself. Traveling alone, I discovered strengths I never knew I had: courage to face the unknown, freedom to explore, and peace in solitude. It was a turning point, an act of self-love. I shared my story publicly, not for sympathy, but for power. Through essays and social media, I connected with women who had endured similar pain. Their stories of survival fueled my own healing, reminding me I wasn't alone. Mom and Dad reached out a few times, their voices tentative, filled with regret. I chose not to respond. Protecting my peace was more important than reopening wounds. Healing required boundaries, and I stood firm. I immersed myself in work, friendships, and passions that nurtured my soul. The pain lingered but no longer controlled me. It was a shadow I acknowledged without fear. They cropped me out of their lives, but I framed my own. One evening, sitting by the window, I held the velvet box containing the ring. I smiled, knowing this was more than jewelry. It was a testament to my survival and growth. I decided to gift the ring to a friend who had been my anchor. I enclosed a note: carry this as a reminder that even in absence, we find strength. It was a passing of the torch, a symbol of hope. The past no longer defined my worth or dictated my future. I was the author of my own story, free to write new chapters on my terms. I walked away from the shadows of favoritism and into the light of self-love and acceptance, no longer seeking validation. I found peace within. The pain they caused became fuel for my resilience, the silence a canvas for my voice. They didn't invite me to the wedding, but I invited myself to a life of freedom. And that made all the difference.